2, go on, and we're live.
Hi everyone, welcome to our first RPP forum, the place to come for all things about getting started and working with research practice partnerships. We will hear from educators and researchers around the United States about the successes, challenges, and strategies for overcoming challenges when we get together to solve our most pressing educational problems. It's October 15th and we're here for our very first forum topic, getting a partnership started. Today we're going to have a conversation about how partnerships get off the ground and how to find effective partners for collaboration. My name is Bill Penuel and I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder and facilitating this forum discussion with support from the Research Practice Collaboratory, a project funded by the National Science Foundation. I am really excited to welcome our invited panelists who bring a range of backgrounds and expertise in research practice partnerships. You can find this and all future forum conversations archived at bit.ly/RPP forum. For today's forum, we invite you to participate too on Twitter using the hashtag #RPPchat to share ideas that you find interesting and also to pose questions to the panelists. Annie Allen from our team is going to be monitoring Twitter during the forum and feed me questions to the audience, so please add your questions. So I want to introduce our panelists here just to give you, and they will talk a little bit more about their partnerships in a minute. We have from the Stanford SFUSD partnership, Ritu Khanna from the San Francisco Unified School District, Norma Ming, also from San Francisco Unified, and Laura Wentworth from California Education Partnerships. And this partnership is funded in part by the Stanford Graduate School of Education, and its aim is to build the capacity of Stanford professors and San Francisco administrators to partner on projects aimed at making improvements to San Francisco schools and beyond. From the Science Stars partnership, we have April Luehmann of the University of Rochester. And this partnership focuses on identifying and supporting youth to develop meaningful relationships with adults, position young people as authors and communicators of meaningful and rigorous science, and work to effect positive change through science with high school youth, the high school that young people attend, and in the Rochester community where young people live. And from the Bellevue and University of Washington partnership, we have Angie DiLoreto of the Bellevue School District and Nancy Vai of the University of Washington. And for many years now, this partnership has been focused on the collaborative design of problem and project-based learning curricula that support teachers in providing student-centered learning experiences. Welcome to each and all of you. And the way this is going to work today is I'm going to ask our panelists for the first couple of questions to go around and answer a couple of questions in common, and then we'll go from there and they'll be able to jump in when they want to answer questions either that they've been received ahead of time or that come from our audience from Twitter. And then towards the end, they're going to actually share some resources with you from their partnership, things that they have found useful or finding useful now in their work. So without further ado, I'm going to get started and ask each of the partnerships in turn to talk a little bit about how their partnership got started, specifically who initiated the first contact and how are these partnering people and institutions brought together. So I'll let Stanford and SFUSD start, whichever one of you would like to jump in and start the conversation.
I actually think Ritu is going to give a little history first around partnership in San Francisco. Ritu, can you start with that?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I want to begin by saying that San Francisco does have strong relationships working with other external partners, be they universities or groups. So the one that we've had a really long-standing relationship with has been SERP, the Strategic Education Research Partnership. And SERP was interesting in that it brought, based on your interest and need and direction, SERP would bring experts from the field to you to discuss and to provide you with the research on that direction. So SERP has been a long-standing partner, again concentrating around the math work for a while. We've also worked with PACE, which is another research partnership that's we've had. But as we've evolved, we started finding ourselves having many individual partnerships with many Stanford professors. And those individual partnerships needed some coordination. And that coordination is when Laura came into the role. Also, those research partnerships were funded by the Silver Giving Foundation. And so I'll let Laura take it from there.
Yeah, so one of the funders for the many Stanford SFUSD projects prior to 2009 realized, asked the question, his name's Phil Hopper, and president of the Silver Giving Foundation, asked the question to both the superintendent and the dean at the Graduate School of Education, who's utilizing this research and how is this partnership strategic and how could we take advantage of this? And so they started the position I'm currently in as the director of the partnership to help make that relationship more strategic. And when Ritu and other administrators in the district went to examine how many projects were going on in 2009 when we started, it was like 40 projects between Stanford and San Francisco. And so we have streamlined those things, and we'll talk a little bit later about just how we've streamlined those projects, really focusing in on the research agenda of the school district and targeting that research and finding nice matches between what the research interests are and what the district interests are, and being much more strategic about that.
So how did you go about figuring out how you're going to get this launched and started? Picking research projects and partnering individual researchers, people who've been working solo now working as part of a group.
Well, the first thing we did was we brought everyone together, the Stanford professors and the SFUSD administrators, in what we now call our annual meeting. It was our inaugural annual meeting. And actually, I think the very first one was like a room full of 20 people or something, even though there were more people involved. But the second one, or the original one that kicked us off, during that meeting, we decided to write a vision statement and craft a vision statement. We realized we were two discrete institutions that each had mission statements, and those mission statements overlapped a bit and had a common purpose. But we wanted to have a vision for our partnership. And so crafting that joint statement together was really important. Some of the things in that statement that were kind of unusual are that there'd be a two-way dialogue between researchers and practitioners, that this wasn't just a one-way street. And also that we were really hoping that this research would help improve outcomes for students, and also be a model for other research practice partnerships across the nation.
So turn to April and see if you want to say a little bit about how Science Stars got started as a partnership and the partnership with the school. So.
Sure. It started about 11 years ago, Science Stars did, and it started really as a practice before it started as a partnership. I'm a teacher educator for secondary science teachers, and I run the name of my overarching program, I think you can see the logo there, is Get Real Science, and it's based on the premise that kids learn science by doing science, and teachers learn how to teach science best by teaching science. And our predominantly middle-class white teachers had a real lack of experience with a couple things that were really important to our social justice mission. One is designing instruction around the scientific practices that are long-term and authentic. Another thing that we really needed to work on is really understanding, loving, appreciating, tapping into the unique resources that urban kids bring to their learning. So Science Stars was created to be a learning space for pre-service teachers, first and foremost, situated in our Rochester City School District, where they have done a lot of student teaching. So I had been in all these schools, had a number of connections, but we hadn't had a collective situated effort in any one. So it started as a practice-based thing, and later on I added my research component to it. Our pre-service teachers then started an after-school club called Science Stars, where they develop long-term investigations with kids around issues that are interesting and relevant to the kids in the last 14, 15 sessions. And the group that became our real significant practice partners were, of course, our youth, because it's a voluntary partnership, right? It's a voluntary after-school club, and these kids need to want to be in partnership with us from the beginning of the semester when we recruit all the way till we present our findings at a public conference at the end of Science Stars. While we're doing this, we're situated in their local school. Because we've been doing 11 years, this is our 9th year in the same school. As we spend more and more time in East High School, of course, we are, just like Nancy just said, you sort of become much more aligned with your missions and visions between the school, between the students, and with us. So the evolution has been for us much more about merging what the kids really want, what the school wants for the kids, and what we want, what we want for them, which is actually just to be a really positive presence and source of recognition for the amazing youth and people at East.
Great. And let's hear a little bit from Washington, UDub, and Bellevue School District.
So our partnership is almost 10 years old. We've kind of lost track of the actual date that it started, but we think it's sometime around 2006. It was initiated, and I think this makes it a little bit different maybe. It was initiated by the superintendent of the Bellevue School District. At that time, the superintendent was Dr. Mike Riley, and he and his leadership team had for a number of years been working towards the development of a shared core curriculum for the district. And we're in the process at the time that we started our partnership of moving that curriculum onto a web-based platform so that it was a public document, if you will, at least public to the school leadership and teachers in the schools. And Dr. Riley actually, and his leadership team had read a recent volume at that time by my colleague John Bransford. The NRC volume, How People Learn, had been published a few years previously, and Mike was, I think, very interested in that book, and he learned that John had recently come to the University of Washington to start the Life Center there, and so he reached out to John and said, we have this core curriculum. The purpose of this core curriculum is to have an embodiment of the teaching and learning in our district so that it can be continuously improved. We can look at it, we can inspect it, we can change it. And so he asked John if there might be some interest among he and his colleagues to actually take a look at the core curriculum and think about how it might be improved from the standpoint of how people learn, knowledge of how people learn. So, that's really how it came about. John in turn brought his team together, and was a member of that team. And Mike brought his leadership team together, and Angie was a member of that team. And we spent a very long time, I would say, almost a year, kind of in a discovery phase where we met regularly, monthly, to kind of learn about one another. We reviewed their curriculum. They heard from us about the kinds of curriculum efforts we had been involved in some of our prior research. And so it was really more a matter of trying to understand where there might be some shared interest and a shared problem for us to work on together. When Mike first came to us, he said, I want you to kind of focus on our K-12 science curriculum, which we knew was just way too broad for us. And so we ultimately came, because of our prior work and expertise in elementary science and some design work in that area, we came to focus on elementary science as a place where we might work together in the context of our partnership. So. Angie, are there anything else you might want to add about that?
I think that sounds great. Our initial product was just a one unit that we co-developed, and that provided some groundwork and some foundation for future work together.
Great. So we hear three different ways that partnerships emerge. You know, there's ongoing individual research happening with individual investigators in a district coming together and trying to join forces. You have, in April's case, something that starts out as really a support for practice for teacher educators in teacher education, emerging into a partnership, and then a little bit more of a cold call kind of thing where somebody in a school district is really drawn to a researcher and a scholar who's come to the university. So I just underscore there's so many different ways that partnerships can begin. And I'm wondering now if the group could reflect a little bit on this, which is, okay, once you know you had a partnership, how did you figure out what the initial work would be? And I really want to invite everybody to get into the nitty-gritty of it, because what's valuable in these sessions, I think, will be not the what you did, but actually how'd you figure out in the Bellevue case, like to work on a curriculum unit, because it certainly didn't start there. And so we'll start with Stanford SFUSD. So when you formed this partnership, how'd you figure out like the initial focus of what your work would be?
So we did an assessment of kind of what was going on, because there were a lot of Stanford projects going on, and the research department looked at like all the different research projects, and we realized the different themes or areas we were most focused in on. But we also realized like a lot of the projects weren't aligned to the district's strategic plan. They were more centered around what the researchers were interested in. So then SFUSD did a really good job articulating more clearly in their research application, and we're communicating that more frequently, what their research agenda is, and speaking about that in two ways, by saying, here we have a set of 6 strategies we're working on in our school district, in our strategic plan, and then also they had a criteria which they were looking for projects that required low amounts of resources, but had a high potential for positive impact. And so by having those 2 sets of criteria, that kind of helped start to narrow and encourage Stanford SFUSD projects and research in general in the district that was much more targeted at the strategic plan. I think maybe Norma or Ritu could talk a little bit about some of the structures and activities we put in place to help the researchers and practitioners work more closely together. Norma, you want to talk?
So I think one partnership in particular that I do want to detail out is the one that we had with a professor in Stanford, Sean Reardon, and it was to study the English language pathways. And with this partnership, what happened is we did form many structures of how to exchange ideas in a partnership, but this was driven by political agenda too. So the Board of Education wanted to know, the San Francisco community wanted to know, how are the different language pathways successful in San Francisco. So there was a whole layer of political agenda along with an immediate accountability need for giving some perspective on our bilingual pathways. And so at that time when Stanford came together and wrote a grant with SFUSD to study it, there was the keen interest of the district to know more about it, maybe driven by a political agenda, but as we continued to then collaborate, we established many structures that were very beneficial to the partnership, such as we met on a monthly basis, the practitioners and the researchers, where the researchers gave field-based insights on some of the results that were being shared by the researchers and said more questions that would be emerging from the practitioner point of view versus the research point of view. So I think that was one partnership, again, maybe driven by a political agenda that caused a need in a department, but did end up in having some structures that did help the partnership thrive.
I would say that our experience in San Francisco is that every research project in its initial development is a combination of ongoing navigation and negotiation. So some of the questions originate from a researcher having a set of questions that fit in with their particular research career and their research agenda, and other questions originate more from the district having particular questions of practical need. And the process of figuring out the match between them requires ongoing conversations to figure out what are the theoretical questions that actually are relevant to and can be put into use in practice in a time scale that makes sense to the practitioner so that they can actually use the research now rather than waiting some number of years from now. And so in those conversations, there's a lot of back and forth figuring out, okay, so instead of this area of questions, maybe we'll refine it in this way, we'll add this other direction to make sure that you can make use of it right away. Other times when it comes from the practitioner, they know that there's a certain need. After they talk to the researchers, they find out, so here's this existing body of research that helps me answer it, and then here's this other remaining question where new research, original research on empirical data that we have can help clarify that a little bit more and figure out which aspect of this question that I have, this practical need that I have, can be answered in a productive way by collaboration with a researcher.
So I know in your partnership too that Stanford put some money on the table for being able to support research. How'd you figure out the process to give out that money to support that?
Well, we developed a plan, and really that's it. I know we're talking about starting a partnership here, but that really was our 2.0, right? That was our next evolution. And so what we actually did was we took what we learned in the first 3 years and we put that into some more structures, like having a request for proposals and inviting requests for proposals that were aligned to the strategic plan. That we haven't talked about this, but Norma's referencing it a little bit, having a clear district owner that's involved early on in the negotiation of that project, that takes ownership over that research question, is going to help operationalize that project and really knows in advance how potentially they're going to use those findings, whether the findings land this way or that way. And then also too, we really want to make sure our projects are generalizable, so they meet a high level of validity and reliability, but then they're also interesting to the broader field and other districts, so that it's not just solely useful for San Francisco. And then the other thing we did was actually marry the district's need for having real-time research on a faster pace with doctoral students' desire to experience doing research within a practical setting. And that's really Norma's role. She can talk a little bit more about that, Norma.
So one of the newer initiatives that's been going on in the district as of last year is the Action Research Team, which is a set of Stanford doctoral students from the Graduate School of Education who are working within the district to help support the implementation of a strategic plan. And these projects are unique from the typical way that research happens within many school districts, which is instead of being led by a professor and a group of researchers, whether postdocs, research assistants, doctoral students, and so forth, they're much smaller. So the doctoral students work with my assistants to try to figure out what is the set of questions that would best help the district within a single year, instead of being multi-year projects or even a longer scale project than that, where we have to do that negotiation on a much more rapid time scale to figure out what is it that they can do in the short time period with only one person to talk to these other administrators and practitioners to figure out what those needs are, where their particular background would be a good match to this question. And so that's a little bit of a microcosm of this type of model of research where you have that close collaboration, except it happens much faster and happens with a much smaller team of students and researchers supporting them.
That's great, and I think that illustrates one of the key challenges of research practice partnerships that they have to figure out, which is the different timescales of researchers and practitioners in terms of their need, the conduct of their work, and how they can both be of value to their practice site while also contributing and doing really good social science. So.
I just would add one thing, that we did time-bound the incentive fund projects too. So those actually happen in a year. And it's pretty impressive what when you give professors out there, more time-bounded, deadline or stricter deadlines, they really can meet them. It's amazing.
So district partners, give us deadlines. We need them.
Exactly.
So April, you characterized your work as starting as a practice and then evolving into a partnership. Were there some specific moments that you can point to where, like, oh, this is evolving into a partnership, and how would you characterize those? Like, what was going on that made you think this is no longer the thing that I've started, but much bigger and a partnership?
Yeah, I've been wrestling ever since we started these conversations about exactly who my partners are, because it's a multi-group effort that certainly crosses boundaries, but they're different. They're also different groups. So the three sets of sort of learners or partners are the youth that we serve, the pre-service teachers who are also master's students working on a really theoretically grounded, sort of internally persuasive dialogue. Like, they want to know what they stand for and why they stand for it, and they learn that through the practices of STARS and other places. And then the doctoral students that I work with. And so they all sort of blend and merge, and I really like the way the conversation just led to the timescales. Because STARS is interesting in that we have every year a brand new start. Every year it's sort of an annual implementation based on lessons learned from last year, but rolled out with new players this current year. And the longtime players are myself and the kids, right? So some of my kids started with me in 7th grade, and 10 of them just walked across the stage in June, and now they're college stars, and they still come back and advise us. So they and I are the long timers, whereas the pre-service teachers come once a year and bring their sort of developing selves and their backgrounds of expertise to the table. So I think the way we learn and sort of our time scale is we start every August with an all hands on deck 4-hour professional development meeting where the pre-service teachers have already crafted what content, background, and scientific expertise they bring to the table that they think will be interesting to kids. And then we work really hard with students, with administrators from East, with the pre-service teachers, with graduated pre-service teachers who are now practicing teachers in the district, to say what it is that STARS needs to be, what questions we want to pursue, how do we connect to the community. And we live out the norms that we've learned the previous year and the practices with really careful rationale for what we're doing. But one of our mantras is embrace it or change it. So we want the pre-service teachers to use the theory that they're developing to really push back on what kids need and how we do it. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask, tell me a little bit about how youth voices figure in here, because I think that's one of the unique characteristics of your partnership on our panel today, is that young people are really partners. So what does it make? What difference does it make that they have a say in their program here in this partnership?
I can tell you that the adults that are involved value the youth voices more than anybody else. When we do that 4-hour professional development, it's the kids who sit at the table and say, that's not going to fly, or that which you're proposing actually has whole different levels of meaning in our world than what you're actually setting out, which is a very humbling, awesome experience. To have that guidance from the beginning and throughout. They're dying to be asked, and they have expertise to share. So we don't do it as often as we want. One year we actually created an entire leadership team of stars, and they met to plan all the agendas for the movies that we made. We made science documentary films. And they met with me to plan the next STARS meeting, and they ran the STARS meeting and sort of debriefed those problems. That was really powerful, but we haven't done that every year.
And how, if at all, April, is the research? You said you started doing research kind of midstream here. How's the research different because you're doing it in this partnership or collaborative way than maybe in the past that you had approached research?
Well, the research is very ethnographic. It has to be very open to what gets lived in every given year, and so having thoughtful doc students with me to sort of reflect on what's being experienced every time helps us craft questions that are especially powerful for this particular group as well as important for the literature. So we study, for example, one of the things is how do youth construct multimodal representations of their science, which looks very different and feels very different from science that adults do. But we didn't know that until we watched them do some embodied modeling of scientific phenomenon and get very nervous about words like vagina. Like they wanted to use scientific terminology, but they could not say it out loud, so then we had to figure out other modes of sort of using communication strategies. So that sort of connects the kids and the adults together in their research. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So let's hear from Bellevue, UDub, a little bit about how you all started out. And you started out with Mike Riley approaching you and somehow wound up to curricular co-design. How'd that happen?
So the curriculum evaluation piece ended up turning into a large round table of all of the partners sitting around talking about our entry points. I think Nancy mentioned that it was it took a long time to share our interests and try to find some entry points for us. We put a lot of ideas on the table. I think we ended up specific with science because of one of the another reason that we ended up with science is because of the capacity in the district and the current efforts. We had 3 full-time developers working on reform-based science curriculum that was more student-centered and more focused on student learning in science than it was on what the teacher was saying in science. And so that was for an 8th grade physics course, a 9th grade biology course, and a 10th grade chemistry course. So since we had the supports from the Gates Foundation for our public representation of the curriculum, then we had an actual artifact to analyze and to sit down with. Since that 8th grade physics, 9th grade biology, and 10th grade chemistry work was already ongoing, we wanted to pick something that was accessible and that was also within the science realm that we had capacity for.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I think also from the university side, there was among the individuals who comprised the UDub team, if you will, there was expertise and interest in elementary science as well. And so I think given that that elementary work was kind of part of what the district was interested in, and because of the interests and background of the people at the university side, that's how we at least ultimately ended up focusing on elementary science as our starting point. I think the other thing that kind of got us more focused around the partnership work was when elementary science was kind of laid out as a possible entry place for us. That then, as researchers, we went about doing some research to see what the not only what the curriculum looked like, but also we went into classrooms and did a series of classroom observations across grade level. We did focus groups with the teachers who were teaching that curriculum. We talked with students informally in the classroom. So we tried to get a sense of kind of what that experience of teaching that curriculum was like for the constituents. And then based on that, we then kind of reported back to the district leadership around where we saw there might be some opportunities for us to collaborate around some redesign and research. So it was kind of a process of ever kind of deepening or getting more specific about what we would collaborate around, and then ultimately, you know, once we had that focus, it was then the question about, well, how are we going to work together around this? So we didn't go into this saying this was going to be a research practice partnership and do design-based implementation research. It was really, we were feeling our way as to how we would work together around what we saw was kind of a shared opportunity for some work. So, and you know, it wasn't seamless by any stretch of the imagination. And we, as Angie mentioned a few moments ago, what we ultimately decided to do was to see if we could do some kind of redesign around one of the curriculum units comprising the existing curriculum. But we really didn't have the structures in place for us to do that as a group. And so what ultimately happened was that, you know, a group of the Bellevue folks went away and did some redesign work, and then the university folks went away and did some redesign work, and we came back together, and oh my goodness, we didn't, there were lots of places where we didn't share, you know, sort of a common perspective or a common redesign strategy. But having said that, we've kind of talked about this, Angie and I, since then, and it seemed like a good place for us to start to do that, because then we actually had some shared artifacts, you know, a set of artifacts that we could talk about with one another instead of sort of talking past with language. And so, you know, so I think ultimately that, while that was hard and for us to kind of move through that, I think ultimately was very positive. And we ended up coming out of that with a strategy to come together around redesign of a unit that we agreed we wanted to do some pilot testing of and research together around. And so that's where it came from. But obviously, you know, we didn't have these organizational structures in mind as we were going about this the first time around. I think, like somebody said, you know, we're in a different phase of our partnership now, and we have established some ways of working together that seem to work and help us sustain. But it was feeling we were making it up a lot of times as we went along. And you know, you have to do that with trust, and I mean, you have to have some relationships there to do that.
So one of the themes here is sometimes you don't know when the partnership is getting started, when it's getting started. I think across all three groups we're hearing that theme. I want to go now to some questions, and I'm going to actually work backwards because Nancy gave me a nice segue here. Leandra Fernandez asks, how do you facilitate communication between researchers and practitioners when we speak different languages? And Nancy's given a good example of one way. You design something together. And now I just want to open it up to whoever might want to speak to say, you know, how do you facilitate that communication? Like, what are some strategies that you have for speaking across the different languages?
I'll give two. One is when we organize our annual event, we specifically sit it's wedding seating. So we sit the researchers next to practitioners. So they're kind of forced to talk to each other, which sounds like a simple thing, but actually, they're people and they're human, and they have some overlapping mission in what they're trying to do. So actually, it's getting them talking is a really great strategy, and it feels like once they're talking about a common topic that they both share and they both are mutually interested in, then the research findings are, even if it's in researchese, it's much easier for the practitioner to understand, and then it's also much easier for the researcher to understand the practitioner's input because it's very related to their research question. And then I would say second, I'll remove my hat from my role right now, but because I think a lot of the professors, if they were here, they would talk about the importance of having an intermediary. Someone like Nancy, I'll just point out, just because I know your relationship, and Angie at Bellevue, they play the intermediary role by having this strong relationship, and they can talk across the boundary between research and practice. And sometimes as an intermediary, I play more of a role of talking in each of the worlds and then helping to connect them. The research department at San Francisco Unified also plays this role. It's partly why it's important for them to talk about this too, because they often have to speak not only to the researchers, but then across all the different departments in their district. And so that actually is an important role for helping to facilitate communication.
I can add a couple things. Building off of what you said, I really think that being able to speak both languages really helps if there's somebody to do that. I think one of the things that STARS benefits from is that there's different spaces for different kinds of work. So when we're sort of debriefing the day in practice, we're in one space, and when we're sort of theoretically grounding future work and visioning, we're in physically and geographically another space, and I think that helps a lot. I think also, like your wedding table seating kind of thing, I think just having structures in place to support communication is huge. So like one of the things we do when we bring everybody together for our all hands on deck is we have sort of station work that's really framed around language that is really accessible. Like, so we work really hard on a station about the gotta haves. What are the scientific things we're going to have to understand if we're going to be able to pursue these questions? Or another question is sort of what are our community resources? Where do we go to get help? And having set amounts of time to work on set sort of things allows everybody to sort of bring in their diverse expertise. So I guess roles, structures, tools, and spaces.
That's great. I'm going to take another question from Emily Lynn, and I'm going to add to it a little bit. A couple of you have talked about receiving asks as researchers that are bigger than what you can provide. Looking at the whole K-12, science curriculum, for example, or dealing with a hugely political situation with English learner pathways. How, for the researchers here, how do you manage those? And then for the practice partners who are here, like, how do you keep pushing back and make sure that the researchers are tackling enough of what you need them to be of value to the district or school? That's a hard one, huh?
I did actually tweet about this while when I saw that question, and I just said I think the long-term nature actually helps with that because you can bite off bits as you go. And actually, the English Learner Pathways project, we've subsequently had like 2 other projects spawn from that because that one project couldn't tackle everything with that one issue. So the questions around, well, what about what are the outcomes for these EL pathways? Then what is the quality of these EL pathways? Those are 2 completely different studies. And now we're on to, so what are we going to do about it, right? What are we going to do to actually improve the quality and then the outcomes? So I think, it's, again, that project, those relationships have been going on for 5 years, and I think that matters.
I think from the Bellevue, Washington partnership, one thing that was explicit about not our work maybe initially, but several years into it, was that we knew that in the context of our curriculum design work that we were always going to be coming up short from the perspective of the district in terms of what we could reasonably kind of develop and test and the time frame for that. And so I think what we tried to do in conceptualizing our work together was to think about, the work that we did do as being a set of models for the district thereafter. And we were very explicit about trying to articulate design principles for our redesigns, as well as as well as developing model curriculum units that embodied those. So that in a sense, those were things that became, that district came to know about and own, and for their efforts beyond that. But I think, and Angie, you can jump in, because I know that we had talked about kind of how slow we are from the university side of things, or this curriculum work seems so slow at the beginning.
I think we're really fortunate that that our district also recognizes that curriculum work is slow, and that the process of iterative improvement really does require that kind of commitment and that kind of focus. And yes, we had a few we had certainly some situations where we needed to be moving faster, and we tried to negotiate that in the context of our partnership.
I think one way that East High gets what they need from me and from STARS is actually asking us to share our work in different venues for different people at different spaces. And so the questions that I want to ask sometimes are a little more, I don't know, the questions that I spend time studying with doc students are a little bit more esoteric and complicated and nuanced, and I need to speak to those, but I also need to be able to speak to a auditorium full of parents about what Science Stars is and needs to be for their youth and for those families and for that community. And sometimes I need to speak to the school board about why we're investing in these resources, and they've given me a room. And so I think the different spaces and places that I'm invited to participate in help us negotiate multiple agendas.
That's great. And a good place to close this part of our meeting, just that reminder, we don't have to say everything the same way in one place to our partners, but there are lots of venues that we can share our work, and using different languages to tie those back. So as part of each forum, we will be giving each partnership, our guests here, a chance to share something that they're finding useful in their work. It could be a book they're reading, a tool they're using to help organize their work, pretty much anything that inspires them. And these resources are going to live on the Research Practice Collaboratory website, which is at researchandpractice.org. So look for these resources there, or links to those resources which are going to appear in Twitter as people talk about them. So, and it's already come up a little bit, like, partnership work benefits from tools and practices and routines that really help organize the work. So this is a great chance to hear some of the things that our partners are finding useful. So we'll start with the San Francisco Unified Stanford partnership, and let's hear a little bit. They'll have about a couple minutes to talk about their particular tool. So.
Ritu, do you want to kick it off? Are you there? I don't know if she's there. We mentioned, I think on your list, a chapter from Cynthia Coburn and Stein's book, which has a number of chapters on collaborative research and how that relates to policy and practice. And there's a case study on Boston that I think it's chapter 10 that specifically talks about different ways to think about research use and the use of research. I hear Cynthia Coburn mention this a lot, but that it's not, while we might strive for instrumental use, where the research is actually directly influencing the decision that's being made. Oftentimes, it's more symbolic in nature or conceptual in nature. And I think what we've learned is that there are values to all of those, and they can be looked upon positively or negatively, but that framework actually has been helpful for us in thinking about how is the research influencing decision making here at the district.
Great. I'll just add about that chapter. It's a really wonderful comparative case study of 3 different reports in the same partnership, and which ones get taken up and which ones don't, and the conditions that really matter. And one of the big themes there is relationships and brokering, the things that have come up today.
Yeah.
So, April, you want to share your resources? Tell us a little bit about what you shared.
I'm going to focus on the first one that you'll see up there. It's a very different kind of resource than that was just shared. But our Science Stars Inquiry Meta Map is a 3-foot by 5-foot organization. Well, 3-foot by 5-foot poster that hangs in public spaces of East High that has varied cells of the investigative process in a nonlinear format. And it is both a working document for our group, for each lab team that's working, as well as a communication tool for kids to re-author their science to their peers, to their parents. The static sort of representation of their work lives in the halls of East High School when we're not meeting, and so it serves as sort of a working document and as a final artifact, and it simultaneously sort of represents what we have done and what we're expected to do or what we still plan on doing to bring the science full term and ready for public consumption. We had so real quickly, we had it represents sort of a lessons learned over long periods of time, because we would have different kids come. We had we'd meet twice a week, and so the catching up of where we've been and what we're going to do is a huge part of it, plus the being able to author the stories over and over again with our own artifacts. So you'll see on the meta map that there's things about what we've done today and how does it contribute to our overall storyline. So it actually has emerged as a scaffold for youth, as well as teachers, as well as researchers who want to sort of document how the thinking and the collaboration has modified and changed over time.
That's great. Thanks, April. These storyline tools are really helpful in a lot of us doing this work in next-gen science standards. I know for really having these developing curriculum and really developing some student-facing and student-centered ways of teaching and learning. So I encourage you to look at the tools that April shared.
And if you laminate them, then they communicate a lack of permanency that's actually very empowering.
All right, because you can erase them and start again.
That's exactly right.
That's great. Little details, so important. Nancy and Angie, you want to share from your perspective some tools that you've shared?
Angie, do you want to?
Sure. I appreciated the question about researchers and practitioners speaking different languages, and so my 2 tools really are part of tools that we've used to both get to know each other and continuing to attend to the needs of the partnership. So this is another tool for providing a structure for that kind of sharing, but sort of foregrounding or underlying both of these things is really the dispositions of the partners to really value and listen to the needs of the other partners. And so these tools need to be used within that set of within that context. And another sort of foregrounding thing is development of shared norms for communication. So the first tool was the discovery tool, the getting to know each other. Sometimes you have a grant proposal and you pull that together, but there's still an opportunity, there still is a need to get to know each other's different institutions. I think that the getting to know each other tool supports mutuality and really may help reveal some assumptions that partners may have about each other. So the first was to consider the intersection of your home institution and the particular partnership, and then the individual context, and then that partnership. And then the other tool that I shared was a partnership check-in, some sort of regularity to attending some common questions that you would continue to come back to continue to work on the partnership itself as well as the work.
Sounds incredible.
That's great. Thank you all for sharing. And I'll just mention this has been a set of tools, too, that this group has evolved with support from the Research Practice Collaboratory, and we'll be continuing to develop and refine these tools from this partnership, which has such a long-standing history at this point within RPPs. So one of the themes I just want to call out today is relationship building. You heard it loud and clear today. It's really about the people and the building those relationships, and especially at the beginning. And also this theme of, hey, we don't know that we're starting a partnership here when we get this beginning. And so that's part of the theme of beginning partnerships and starting partnerships. It may become one, it may not. So one thing I want to invite people to do between now and the next forum, well, first I actually want to thank all of my panelists here today because they really bring a wealth of many years of partnership experience. We counted at least 30 years among us here of partnerships across the three. So really quite a bit of experience and expertise here, so thank you all. And one thing I want to ask you to do, who are listening, between now and the next forum is encourage you to use Twitter to share what you've taken when you've taken a particular action step that I'm going to give people. And so what I'd like you to do is to go find out from somebody who's part of a research practice partnership already, how did theirs start? Who initiated it? What got it going? What bumps did you encounter in the road at the very beginning? So find that out if you're not in a partnership, or maybe ask your existing partner what struggles that they felt at the beginning. You might be surprised by what you learned. And you can continue this conversation on Twitter using the hashtag RPPchat. And you can find resources that are mentioned today on the Research Practice Collaboratory website. Again, that website URL is researchandpractice.org. And research and practice is all one word in that. You can also follow the Research Practice Collaboratory on Twitter at RPC Collaboratory. The Research Practice Collaboratory is funded by the National Science Foundation, and I'll just say that all views are those of our panelists and not of our funder. Join us next time for this, Wednesday on November 19th at the same time at 3 p.m. Mountain for our next forum, where the topic will be defining the focus of partnership work. And you can pose questions ahead of time. This will be a new feature to us on Twitter using the hashtag RPPchat. Then we'll be talking with Ananda Marin of the Rebuilding Relations Partnership at the American Indian Center of Chicago, Phil Bell and Dan Gallagher of the University of Washington Seattle-Renton Partnership, Jean Rue and Emily McLeod of the California Tinkering After School Network, and Ruth Lopez Turley and Carla Stevens of the Houston Education Research Consortium. And that's it for the first Research Practice Partner Forum, where we are researchers and educators working together for a better, more equitable education system for all our nation's young people. Thank you.